His hands were still shaking when he put down the phone, not from fear, but from the weight of what he'd just given up. Ethan Walker had 15 minutes to make the interview that could change everything. 15 minutes to save his son's future. But the woman trapped under the concrete, her eyes finding his through the dust and chaos. She had maybe 5. Fate had always forced this man to choose between a dozen impossible things. Yet somehow, kneeling there in a stranger's blood, ruining the only suit he owned, he'd never felt more certain about anything in his life. He and his son might have to leave that house, leave this city, but that was better than turning away from the woman for whom, right now, he was her entire world. The morning started at 5 a.m. in the cramped Mission District apartment. Ethan moved through the darkness with practiced silence, starting coffee before waking his 7-year-old son, Noah. The kitchen was small enough that only one person could stand at the counter, but Ethan had learned to make it work. He always made it work. On the counter sat a small robot Noah had built from cardboard and spare parts, one leg dangling by a thread of tape. Ethan picked it up with the careful attention of someone who understood how broken things fit together. He'd been working as a mechanical engineer at a mid-sized firm for 3 years now, the job stable but limiting. The salary barely stretched to cover their small apartment, Noah's school expenses, and the medical bills still lingering from Sarah's accident 3 years ago. But today could change everything. Today was the final interview at Montgomery Corporation, one of the biggest engineering firms on the West Coast. He'd already passed 2 grueling rounds, competing against 200 applicants, and now he was one of 5 finalists. The position would triple his current salary. It would mean Noah could have the life he deserved, not just the life they could afford. Ethan glued the robot's leg back in place and set it on Noah's nightstand. The grey suit hung on the bathroom door, slightly worn at the cuffs but pressed and ready. It was the only suit he owned, and today it had to make him look like someone worth promoting to the big leagues. Noah shuffled into the kitchen at 6:30, hair sticking up, eyes puffy with sleep. Ethan had scrambled eggs and toast waiting, orange juice in the only uncracked cup they owned. "Big day, Daddy." Noah's voice was small and hopeful. Ethan smoothed his son's wild hair. "Yeah, buddy. Big day. If you get the new job, can we get pizza every Friday?" The question hit him in the chest. Pizza every Friday. Such a small dream for a 7-year-old to have. Ethan forced a smile past the tightness in his throat. "When I get the job, we'll get pizza every Friday. Promise." At the school gate, Noah wrapped his arms around Ethan's waist. "Good luck, Daddy. You're the best engineer in the whole world." Ethan crouched to eye level with his son. "And you're the best kid in the whole world. I'll pick you up at 3, okay?" He watched Noah disappear through the school doors, then checked his watch. 7:45. The interview was at 9:30 downtown. He'd spent 6 months preparing for this opportunity, working late nights after Noah went to bed, studying Montgomery Corporation's projects, rehearsing answers to every possible question. 2 rounds of interviews already passed. This was the final hurdle. The BART train was crowded with Monday morning commuters. Ethan found a window seat and reviewed his portfolio one last time. The designs he'd created, the innovations he'd proposed to his current company, the solutions that had saved them money and improved efficiency. This was his ticket out of barely making it. This was his chance to finally give Noah the stability they both needed. Montgomery Station appeared at 9:15. Ethan gathered his things and stood as the train slowed. Through the window he could see the Montgomery Corporation building rising above the street, all glass and steel and promise. 15 minutes to walk 2 blocks and climb to the 14th floor. 15 minutes until his life could finally shift toward something better. The doors opened. Ethan stepped onto the platform. And the world started shaking. At first it felt like the train was still moving, some trick of momentum. But then the shaking intensified, and the platform buckled beneath his feet. People screamed. Overhead lights swayed violently. Glass shattered somewhere in the distance, with a sound like 1,000 wind chimes breaking at once. Ethan grabbed a support column as his portfolio fell, papers scattering across the trembling concrete. Earthquake. 5.8 magnitude, they'd say later. The strongest San Francisco had felt in a decade. The shaking stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving behind an eerie quiet, broken only by distant sirens and people calling out to each other. Ethan's hands were shaking from adrenaline, from the primal response of a body reminded how fragile everything was. He looked at his watch. 9:20. 10 minutes to get to the interview. The building was still standing, just 100 meters away. He could still make it if he ran. Ethan bent to gather his scattered papers, shoving them back into the folder with trembling fingers. And that's when he heard it. A sound that cut through all the other noise, quiet and desperate. "Help! Someone, please help!" The voice came from an alley between two buildings, barely more than a whisper. Ethan froze, his hand still on his portfolio. He should keep walking, should get to that interview. 6 months of preparation. 2 rounds already passed. This was everything. But his feet carried him toward the alley before his brain could talk him out of it. There, half hidden behind a dumpster, pinned beneath a concrete slab that had broken away from the building's facade, was a woman. She was maybe 35, wearing a black blazer now covered in dust and debris. Blood seeped from a gash on her forehead, and her left leg was trapped beneath the concrete at an angle that made Ethan's stomach turn. Her eyes found his through the settling dust, wide and terrified. "Please," she whispered. "I can't feel my leg." Ethan dropped his portfolio. He was moving before he could think, before he could calculate the cost. He knelt beside her, assessing the situation with the same methodical attention he brought to engineering problems. The concrete slab was maybe 200 pounds, resting on her shin. The blood flow suggested a bad break, possibly arterial. She needed help now, or she'd go into shock. "Okay," he said, keeping his voice steady even though his heart was hammering. "I've got you. You're going to be fine." Her eyes locked onto his face, holding onto it like a lifeline. "You should. There's somewhere you need to be. I can see." "Nowhere important," Ethan lied, and pulled out his phone to call 911. The operator's voice was harried, overwhelmed. Multiple emergencies across the city. Ambulances dispatched but delayed. Could he stay with the victim? Could he provide first aid? Ethan looked at his watch. 9:25. 5 minutes until the interview started. He thought about Noah's face at breakfast, asking about pizza on Fridays. Thought about the apartment they could barely afford, the bills stacking up, the chance he'd worked so hard for slipping away with every passing second. And then he looked at the woman, trapped beneath the concrete, at her eyes that held his like he was the only solid thing in a world that had just tried to shake itself apart. "I'm staying," he told the operator. "Tell me what to do." He used his tie, that navy blue tie, the only one he owned, as a tourniquet, wrapping it tight above the wound. The woman cried out, and Ethan murmured apologies, anything to keep her conscious. He found pieces of wood in the alley and used them as levers, gradually lifting the concrete enough to pull her leg free. His suit jacket became a pillow. His dress shirt, torn into strips, became bandages. The woman drifted in and out of awareness. During a lucid moment, she tried to focus on his face. "What's your name?" "Ethan. Ethan Walker." "I'm Claire," she whispered. Then her eyes rolled back. Ethan held her hand, checking her pulse every 30 seconds, watching for the ambulance he could hear but couldn't see. He thought about the interview panel waiting 14 floors above them, thought about the 6 months of preparation, the 2 rounds he'd fought through, the opportunity that was evaporating with every minute that passed. But he didn't let go of Claire's hand. The ambulance arrived at 9:55. By then, Ethan's shirt was soaked with blood that wasn't his, and his hands were covered in grime and concrete dust. The paramedics moved with efficient speed, loading Claire onto a stretcher, praising Ethan's quick thinking. As they lifted Claire into the ambulance, her eyes fluttered open one more time. She looked at him, really looked at him, as if committing every detail of his face to memory. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear. Thank you. Maybe. Or something else. Then the doors closed, and she was gone. Ethan stood in the alley for a long moment, looking down at himself. His suit was ruined. His tie was somewhere in the ambulance. His shirt was destroyed. Blood on his cuffs. Dust in his hair. He looked like a man who'd been through a war. He walked to the Montgomery Corporation building anyway. The lobby was chaos. People evacuating, security guards directing traffic. Ethan approached the reception desk, where a harried woman was fielding phone calls. I had an interview, he said. 14th floor, engineering position. I'm late. She barely looked at him. All interviews were cancelled after the earthquake. You'll receive an email about rescheduling. When? I don't know, sir. We have to assess building safety first. Please evacuate with everyone else. Ethan nodded numbly and turned away. Outside, he found a bench 2 blocks away and sat down, still processing what had just happened. 6 months of work, 2 rounds of competition, and he'd missed the final interview. For a stranger. For someone whose name he barely remembered. Claire. His phone buzzed. An email from Montgomery Corporation. Dear Mr. Walker, due to today's earthquake, your scheduled interview has been cancelled. We will not be rescheduling at this time. Thank you for your interest in Montgomery Corporation. Not rescheduling. Not postponed. Cancelled. They'd already filled the position or decided on another candidate. He was out. Ethan sat on that bench until his hands stopped shaking, until the numbness gave way to something heavier. He thought about Noah, waiting at school, expecting good news. He thought about their apartment, about staying in a job that barely paid enough, about never quite getting ahead no matter how hard he tried. But mostly, he thought about Claire's eyes, the way they'd held on to his like he was saving the world instead of just one person. And he realized he'd made the only choice he could live with. The only choice that let him look his son in the face and teach him what it meant to be a good man. Even if being a good man meant losing everything else. Ethan walked to Noah's school, his ruined suit drawing stairs. He'd figure out the rest later. Right now, his son needed him. The days after the earthquake blurred together. Ethan returned to his regular job, the same mid-sized firm with the same limiting salary. He didn't tell Noah about the cancelled interview, didn't want to see the disappointment. Instead, he kept going, kept working, kept pushing forward because that's what you did when giving up wasn't an option. 3 weeks passed before everything changed. Ethan was at the Mill, a coffee shop on Divisadero Street, working on a project during his lunch break. He came here sometimes when he needed to think, to escape the noise of the office. The place had good Wi-Fi and strong coffee, and the barista knew him well enough to start his order when she saw him walk in. He was focused on his laptop when someone sat down at the table next to his. He glanced up out of habit and felt his heart stop. It was her. Claire. The woman from the earthquake. She looked different now, professional and polished, her hair styled, the gash on her forehead healed to a faint scar. She was walking with a slight limp, leaning on a cane, but she was alive and whole and sitting 20 feet away from him. Ethan stared, unable to look away. He'd thought about her often in the past 3 weeks, wondered if she was okay, if she'd recovered. But he'd never expected to see her again. Never expected this strange twist of fate. Claire was focused on her phone, didn't notice him watching. The barista called out a name for a drink order, and Claire stood, moving carefully on her injured leg. She reached for the cup at the same moment Ethan stood to stretch his legs, and they nearly collided. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Claire said, stepping back. Then she looked up at his face, and Ethan watched recognition dawn in her eyes. Her expression shifted from polite apology to shock to something that looked almost like wonder. "It's you." "Hi," Ethan managed. "How's your leg?" "You—" Claire seemed to struggle for words. "I've been looking for you. For 3 weeks. The police couldn't find you. The security footage was too blurry. I didn't know your name, couldn't remember." She stopped, pressing a hand to her chest. "You saved my life. I just helped until the ambulance came." "No." Claire's voice was firm. "You saved my life. And then you disappeared." She gestured to an empty table. "Can we talk? Please?" They sat, and Claire told him what the doctors had said. How if Ethan hadn't stopped the bleeding, hadn't kept her conscious, she likely wouldn't have made it. How she'd spent 3 weeks asking everyone, paramedics, police, hospital staff, trying to find the man in the grey suit who'd pulled her from the rubble. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "But more than that, I wanted to understand. You were dressed for something important. I remember that, even through the pain. You had somewhere to be." "An interview," Ethan admitted. "Final round at Montgomery Corporation. I'd passed 2 rounds, worked for 6 months to get there. It was a big opportunity." Claire's expression changed, something shifting behind her eyes. "Montgomery Corporation?" "Yeah. They cancelled it after the earthquake. Didn't reschedule." Ethan tried to keep his voice neutral, but some of the disappointment must have leaked through. "What's your full name?" Claire asked quietly. "Ethan Walker." "Why?" She closed her eyes for a long moment, and when she opened them, they were bright with unshed tears. "Ethan, I'm Claire Montgomery. I'm the HR director at Montgomery Corporation. I was on my way to work when the earthquake hit. I was taking a shortcut through that alley." She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "You were coming to interview with me." The words hung in the air between them. Ethan felt like the ground was shifting again, like the earthquake had never really stopped. The woman he'd saved. The interview he'd missed. The same person. "I didn't know," he said. When I saw you in the alley, I didn't recognize you from the company photos or anything. I just saw someone who needed help." "I know." Claire reached across the table, her hand hovering near his but not quite touching. "That's what makes this so—" She broke off, shaking her head. "Ethan, you gave up everything to save me, and I didn't even know who you were until I got back to the office and saw your name on the cancelled interview list." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of coincidence and consequence settling between them. "I want to make this right," Claire finally said. "I want to give you another chance at that interview." "No." The word came out sharper than Ethan intended. He softened his voice. "Thank you, but no. I appreciate it, but I can't accept that." "Why not? You earned that interview. You competed through 2 rounds. The earthquake cost you an opportunity you deserved." "Maybe." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "But if I interview now, I'll never know if I got the job because I was qualified or because I saved your life. And I need to know that when I succeed, it's because I earned it, not because someone felt obligated to help me." Claire was quiet, studying his face with an intensity that made him self-conscious. Finally, she spoke. "What if it's not about the job? What if it's just about getting to know each other?" "What do you mean?" "I mean—" Claire hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "You saved my life, Ethan. That's not a small thing. And I'd like to know who you are. Not as a candidate, not as someone I owe a debt to, but just as a person. Could we do that? Have coffee sometimes, talk, be friends?" Ethan considered this. There was something appealing about the idea, something that felt right. Not transactional, not obligated, just two people who'd been thrown together by circumstance, trying to understand what that meant. "Okay," he said. "I'd like that." So they started meeting for coffee. Once a week at first, then more frequently. Claire told him about her work at Montgomery Corporation, about the pressure of being the CEO's daughter, about always wondering if people respected her for her skills or just her last name. Ethan told her about Noah, about Sarah's death 3 years ago, about the constant balancing act of being a single father while trying to build a career. They never talked about the interview again, never discussed job opportunities or professional advancement. They were just two people learning each other's stories, finding comfort in honesty and connection. A month passed, then 2. Their coffee meetings expanded to include Noah, who took to Claire immediately. She learned about his robot obsession, started bringing him small mechanical parts she found at flea markets. She came to his school science fair and cheered when he won 2nd place. She integrated into their lives so naturally that Ethan sometimes forgot she was the same woman he'd pulled from the rubble. One Saturday afternoon at Dolores Park, while Noah laid on the swings, Claire turned to Ethan with a thoughtful expression. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "That day of the earthquake, when you decided to stop and help me instead of going to the interview, what were you thinking?" Ethan watched Noah on the swings, his son's laughter carrying across the playground. "I was thinking that you needed help, and I could give it, and that no job, no matter how important, was worth walking away from someone who might die if I did. You're a good man, Ethan Walker. I'm just a man trying to do right by his son, trying to teach him by example what matters." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, she said, "I've been thinking about something, not about giving you a job. I know how you feel about that, but about something different." "What?" "You told me once that you'd thought about starting your own consulting firm, that you had the skills but not the capital or connections to make it work." She turned to face him fully. "What if I helped with the connections? Not with money, not with favoritism, just with introductions. My father knows everyone in the Bay Area engineering community. He could refer you to companies that need consulting work. You'd earn every client on your own merit, but you'd have a foot in the door." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. "Claire, it's not charity," she said quickly. "It's not even really about repaying a debt. It's about recognizing that you have talent and skills that are being wasted at a mid-level firm. And maybe I can help you build something that's entirely yours." He wanted to say no, wanted to hold on to his pride and refuse help from anyone, especially from someone he was starting to care about more than he should. But he thought about Noah, about wanting to give his son better opportunities. Thought about the satisfaction of building something of his own, having the flexibility to be there for Noah while still providing the life they needed. "Okay," he said quietly, "but with conditions. I don't want special treatment, just honest referrals to people who actually need consulting work. And if my work isn't good enough, that's on me. Deal?" Claire smiled, and Ethan felt something shift in his chest, something that felt dangerous and hopeful at the same time. Over the next several months, Claire's father made introductions, and Ethan followed up with professionalism and skill. He registered his business, Walker Engineering Solutions, with Noah designing a logo featuring a robot holding a wrench. His first client was a small manufacturing company. Ethan delivered work that exceeded their expectations, and they referred him to another company. Then another. The business grew slowly but steadily. By winter, 6 months after the earthquake, Ethan had 4 regular clients and enough income to move to a slightly larger apartment. It wasn't the corporate stability he'd once sought, but it was something better: autonomy, purpose, and work he was proud of. And through it all, Claire was there. Not as his savior or benefactor, but as his friend. As someone who showed up at Noah's school events and helped with homework and brought dinner when Ethan was working late. As someone who fit into their lives so seamlessly that Noah started asking questions Ethan wasn't sure how to answer. "Daddy?" Noah said one evening while Ethan tucked him into bed. "Do you like Claire?" "Of course I like her, buddy. She's our friend." "No, I mean—" Noah's face scrunched up in concentration. "Do you like her? The way you liked Mom?" Ethan's breath caught. He'd been avoiding this question, avoiding the feelings that had been growing stronger with every coffee date, every shared laugh, every moment when Claire's hand would brush his and he'd feel electricity run through him. "It's complicated," he said finally. "Why?" "Because Claire is special, and I don't want to mess things up by wanting more than she wants to give." Noah was quiet for a moment, then said with the simple wisdom of children, "Mommy used to say that love is brave, that it's scary but worth it." Sarah had said that. During their first date, nervous and honest, telling him that putting your heart out there was the bravest thing anyone could do. "Your mom was smart," Ethan whispered. The next Saturday, Ethan asked Claire to have dinner with him. Just the two of them. No Noah, no pretense of casual friendship. She said yes immediately, her smile bright and hopeful in a way that made his heart race. They went to a small Italian restaurant in North Beach, sat across from each other with wine and candlelight, and for the first time since they'd met, everything felt different, charged, intentional. "I need to tell you something," Ethan said after they'd ordered. "And I'm terrified of ruining what we have, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel it." Claire's hand found his across the table. "I'm falling in love with you," she said quietly. "I have been for months, since before I really understood what was happening." Relief and joy flooded through him. "I'm falling in love with you too, and it scares me because I haven't felt this way since Sarah, haven't wanted to feel this way. But you make me want to be brave enough to try again. So let's try," Claire said simply. "Let's see where this goes." They didn't rush, took their time building something real, something honest. Claire met Mrs. Chen, Ethan's elderly neighbor who'd become like family. Ethan met Claire's father officially, not as a job candidate, but as the man dating his daughter. They navigated the complexity of blending their lives, of making space for new love while honoring old grief. A year after the earthquake, Ethan stood in his new office space, small but his own, and looked at the framed photo on his desk. Noah, Claire, and him at the beach, all three of them squinting into the sun and grinning. Beside it was another photo, older and more worn. Sarah, Ethan, and baby Noah. Both families, both loves, existing side by side without contradiction. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Dinner tonight? Noah wants to show me his new robot design." Ethan smiled and typed back, "Perfect. Can't wait." He'd thought saving Claire had cost him everything. The job, the stability, the future he'd planned. But standing in his own office, building a business he was proud of, loving a woman who saw him clearly and chose him anyway, he realized he'd been wrong. It hadn't cost him anything. It had given him a choice. And every choice after that, starting his business, opening his heart, building a life that was entirely his own, those were all his decisions, made not out of desperation or obligation, but out of courage and hope. The earthquake had shaken his world apart, but piece by piece he'd built something better from the rubble, something that was his not because someone gave it to him, but because he'd had the strength to reach for it. And that made all the difference.